Hello, everyone. Thank you for your interest in the Cognitive Behavioral and Neuroscience Psychology's information video. My name is Minji, and I'll be your host today. Today's speakers are Dr. Jane Flynn and Rachel Barkley from the CBN Psychology program. Welcome, everyone, and please introduce yourselves and your background. Let's start with Dr. Flynn.
Well, I'm Dr. Flynn. My research interest is in learning and memory, and I focus on transgenic mice modeling Alzheimer's disease. I grew up in England, so I got my undergraduate degree in Oxford, actually in physics, and I came to the United States intending to stay 2 years in 1962, and then I got engaged and got married and stayed, and because of that I had to go on studying. So I like to say I got an accidental PhD in physics from Catholic U, and then I'd long been interested in social aspects of behavior, but due to the British educational system, I'd never thought of that. So I actually ended up doing a PhD in psychology from George Washington University, not least because they let me go part-time because I had already started teaching at Mason.
Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel Barkey. I am a second-year PhD student in the Cognitive and Behavioral Neuroscience program. I got my bachelor's degree in biopsychology from Messiah College, and then I took a break for a little bit and went into working in a mental health hospital, and then came back into research as a master's student at George Mason, and then transferred into the PhD program from there. And right now my research interest is in traumatic brain injuries and their effect on Alzheimer's disease pathology.
Thank you, everyone. Let's start by talking about the PhD program. Professor Flynn, could you tell us about the PhD program?
Yes, so basically the program I think is unusual and interesting because we have faculty who work both with humans and with animals. And so on the human side, we have a fMRI system. On the animal side, we have an animal facility. And so on the human side, we look at cognition, perception, decision-making, and movement. And our new faculty member, Alison Jack, is focusing on autism with a particular interest in women who have autism. And then on the animal side, Ted Dumas is interested in the neural control of behavior and how it develops. And as I said, my interest is in learning and memory, and particularly in disorders such as Alzheimer's disease.
Rachel, could you describe us your experience being a PhD student in the department?
Something that I've really enjoyed about this doctoral program is that it really balances classwork and research. So I feel like I'm getting a lot of practical experience in the lab, and I'm able to learn a lot of different techniques and work on a lot of different projects, as well as having the theoretical knowledge of a lot of different aspects of neuroscience. So I work in an animal lab, but a lot of my classes that I can take are with techniques that are geared towards doing research with humans, which I really appreciate being able to have that dual focus. So yeah, I think it's been a really good balance between those two so far.
Thank you guys so much for your insights. Now let's move on to the MA program. Professor Flynn, what could you tell us about the MA program, and what are some requirements for the MA program?
Well, I think the master's degree is a highly undervalued degree in psychology. I think it's extremely important, can be very useful. And certainly the students in the MA program have had no difficulty in getting jobs and go on to interesting jobs. And we have several MA students at NIH, for example. The program requires 30 to 32 credits, of which 6 is a thesis. Most faculty require a thesis. I do. And so that leaves you essentially with 24 hours, and that's 8 courses. And you have to take, and I think there's a later slide on this, you have to take statistics, and I'll talk about the other courses later. One of the important points I'd make is that Rachel is, for example, a master's student. She's gone on into the PhD, so that the master's program, the courses in the master's program are identical to some of the courses in the PhD. And so if you are able to transition, you can take all your courses into the PhD. And in fact, and then all PhD students have to do a dissertation. In most cases, master's students have to do a thesis, although occasionally they can do an internship.
Rachel, since you were also a master's student before transitioning into being a PhD student, could you talk to us about your experience being a master's student in the department?
Yeah, so like Dr. Flynn said, it was a really smooth transition between the master's program and the PhD program. And for me, I was unsure at first about whether I wanted to complete a PhD. So going into the master's program first was a really good starting point for me, so I could see, what it would be like. I got to jump into the lab right away and start working on a lot of the projects. Realized that I really liked what I was doing, and so that I wanted to continue. So I think for people who are maybe a little bit unsure about whether they want to commit to so much school that getting a PhD would be, I think the master's program is a really good place to test out the waters a little bit to see if you really like what you're doing, and then you end up with a master's degree. So yeah, I thought the way that Mason does this is really nice because you get to apply for the master's program and then see which lab you would like to go into, and you get to go with that lab through the duration of your master's program, so you get heavily involved with the research right from the start.
That sounds fantastic. Now let's start talking about the curriculum requirements for your department. Professor Flynn, what are some course requirements for the CBN program, and what are some required classes versus electives for students to choose from?
Well, actually, before I talk about that, I'd like to go back to the master's program for a second, because I do think it's an excellent program for people who don't know what they want to do, and not everybody does. So it really gives you a chance to sample different labs. Usually we assign someone an advisor before they come in, but you can change advisors. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. Okay, so then let me talk about the requirements. I guess we'll start off with the PhD. So right at the bottom, everybody has to take statistics and take ANOVA or multiple regression. Most people take ANOVA in my lab. Other labs, regression is more important. And then students need to take mammalian neurobiology, neuroimaging, behavioral chemistry, and the course that I teach, neuronal basis of learning and memory. The degree requires, as I said, a master's, in many cases, a master's thesis. So the first 30 hours are what you would take with a regular master's, and then you do get a master's degree along the way, and then you have another 42 hours that you need to do for the PhD, but 12 of these are in the dissertation, so the 30 extra hours. And so basically, people can take these courses in the psychology department. They don't have to take them in CBN. There's a course, I think, in developmental this coming semester. on development of the frontal lobe, which one of our students is taking. Cellular neuroscience is taught in the neuroscience program. Eukaryotic cell biology is taught in the biology department. So there are courses, you can take courses within the psychology department, or you can take them outside.
Rachel, could you tell us about an elective that you enjoyed?
I took the eukaryotic cell biology lab class, which was really interesting because it ran for a week over spring break. And the whole time we were in the lab, work with a bunch of different techniques that I wouldn't have gotten direct experience with otherwise. So we got to do a lot of cell cultures, which was really interesting. And then I also got to learn a lot of techniques that I'm directly using in my research now. So it was a very helpful class.
Now let's shift our gear to research, because course requirements, of course, are not the only source for success as a graduate student. Professor Flynn, could you tell us about the research opportunities, the master's thesis, and the dissertation requirements?
Well, as I said earlier, I think we're unusual because we have a range of facilities. We have the animal facility with a lot of behavioral equipment there, and also, as Rachel said, ability to analyze the brains of the animals, mice or rats, basically. And then we also have the functional MRI system and an EEG system. And so what you can see is that faculty have a range of research interests, and students can work with, students apply in the PhD, apply and usually are accepted into the lab of a specific person, although you can in fact change labs after you've been accepted if the person you want to go to has got space to take you. So Alison Jack is interested, uses fMRI, and she's interested in autism. She's particularly interested in studying autism in women, which is much less studied than autism in males. Jim Thompson also does fMRI, and he's interested in human movement and also in some social aspects of behavior. Craig McDonald does EEG. He's interested in attention and cognitive control. And Martin Wiener does functional MRI. He's interested in sense of time, which I think is one of the most interesting and difficult things to study. And he's also interested in music and the brain. And then moving to the animal side, Ted Dumas is interested in neuronal development and tends to focus on spatial learning in mice through the NMDA and the AMPA receptors, although he does has other areas he studies as well. And then, as I said, I myself am specifically interested in Alzheimer's disease, which I study normally in transgenic mice, although I have done some work with people looking at the role of music in Alzheimer's therapy and Alzheimer's disease. And,
Rachel, sorry, were you gonna?
I guess I should say that research is extremely important in this degree, and our master's is a little unusual in that most faculty require a thesis, when there are times when, for example, with COVID, one person has been allowed to do an internship because the lab she was working in was closed down. PhD students must perform a dissertation.
Okay, Rachel, could you tell us about what you did for your research in the department?
Yes, so for my master's thesis, I was working with a PhD student who was looking at repetitive mild traumatic brain injuries in an Alzheimer's type mouse that a previous student in our lab had developed. And so I was looking at those brains a couple different ways to look at Alzheimer's pathology and to see if the repetitive mild traumatic brain injury further progressed the course of Alzheimer's disease. And I also had a chance to work with a lot of the other students in the lab to help them out on their research as well. And so I got to experience, a bunch of different projects going on at once, which has been great.
Sounds fantastic. Now, graduate programs can be very costly for students, especially if they're out of state. Professor Flynn, what kind of funding opportunities are available for MA students and PhD students?
Well, so let me, before I talk about that, can we go back to the previous slide for a second? And so I just wanted to point out that these are papers, Martin Wiener had a paper on looking at concussion patients, and the first three authors are all students, and it says looking at dynamic conceptual timing. The next paper by Ted Dumas, all the students except for Ted, all the authors except for Ted are students, including some master's students and also actually some high school students, I think. And so he's, as I said, he looks at NMDA receptors and spatial cognition in mice. The next paper is by my students. We have the Tau mouse. Kristen Craven's a PhD student, does his real coaching, and also, in this case, Carlos Hernandez, so 3 PhD students on this paper. And the last paper by Craig McDonald is looking at EEG and looking at error detection. And again, the first 2 students, both PhD students, and the second students are master's students, so that there is a very good opportunity for the students to publish not only their master's thesis or their doctoral dissertation, but I think one of the positive things about the CBN program, and really about the psychology department in general, is that we do encourage people to cooperate. And so, for example, you will see more than one student on a paper. Okay, so then I'm happy that, so the funding and support, the PhD students, I think this is a reasonably generous level of support. We guarantee 4 years in the form of a yearly stipend, and tuition is covered, and students get health insurance. And in return, the students are expected to teach labs or lectures or act as teaching assistants. Now, if the faculty member has a grant, the student may well be supported on the grant. But one of the good things, I think, is I know at other universities, they don't have 4 years of support. And so students, sometimes the faculty member loses their grant, you're kind of left high and dry. In our case, if you were on a grant, then if you were in your first 4 years, you could come back and get support. And in fact, in the CBN program, because we have a lot of labs, the students are often able to teach labs or lectures after 4 years, but we don't guarantee anything after 4 years. The master students, I mean, I regret that we don't have more support for them. We don't guarantee any support, but in fact, certainly in CBN, because we do have a number of labs each semester, we're always looking for students to teach those. And I think at the moment, all the continuing MA students in CBN are actually teaching a lab.
That sounds fantastic. So one of the important things when choosing the right graduate school is fit and the overall department culture. That's one of the questions I actually get personally a lot in my department. Professor Flynn, how would you describe the department culture and what kind of support is there for students?
Well, I think the department is very supportive. I would say that people, both faculty and students, tend to cooperate rather than compete. We admit students with the expectation that we will graduate them. And so most faculty are available to work with students on their research. I'm sure all of us have lab meetings once or twice, and once a week or twice, and once every week or every other week and then meet with people individually. And as I said, we do want people to cooperate, and you saw that with the papers where there'll be a number of students on one paper. And the department very actively values diversity, both in terms of male and female, but also in terms of different racial aspects. And it's something that they really try to make sure that we do have diversity both at the student and at the faculty level. We have a number of student-led organizations. The main one, I think, for CBN is Students in Neuroscience, and this is run by the students, and it encourages discussion and research across different labs, and it also can help provide funding to go to meetings. One of the main ones is the Society for Neuroscience meeting, of course, but there are other meetings too on the human side, which OSFN has a lot of human work now, but there are some other meetings which are specifically human or specifically animal.
Rachel, what kind of support have you received in this program, and how would you describe the department culture?
I think George Mason has a really great culture for their students. I have gotten support not only from my advisor or the principal investigator in the lab, but I've also been able to go to other professors and faculty members when I needed help with a particular technique. They would make time to sit down with me and discuss how I would do it, and one even offered to come down into the lab to help me, to show me how to do it in person if our discussion in his office wasn't enough. So that was really helpful as well. Faculty members have always been willing to make time for me if I had questions or something that I was concerned with. And I feel no hesitation from just popping into my advisor's office whenever I have a quick question and she has the time. And I think that students in neuroscience has also been great because a lot of times I think graduate students can just really focus on the people in their lab and only make friends with the people in their lab, and that can be pretty limiting in terms of both research ideas and the kind of knowledge that you're exposed to. So that organization has been great because we are exposed to just more people, more ideas, and it was really nice because I was moving to Virginia from Pittsburgh and I didn't really know anybody here. And so I was able to make friends that I would meet outside of school from students in neuroscience that weren't necessarily in my lab. So yeah, I think there's a really great culture because you're not competing against each other for certain opportunities, and it is all very helping each other with their own projects, and you don't feel bad about asking somebody for help because people are very, very willing to.
Now let's talk about what happens after you graduate. Professor Flynn, what kind of internship opportunities are usually available, and where do students find jobs after graduation? Could you give us some examples of jobs students have moved on to after graduating? Professor Flynn, your mic is off, I think.
I thought you could unmute me. Okay, I don't think that in the CBN program, students go into internships as much as they might in other programs, although there are some, but it's not really a focus. So students have gone on to positions in many different areas. I mean, a number of students have gone on to faculty positions at universities and colleges. We have a faculty member at Vassar, and we have two students have gone on to universities in Texas, one of them St. Angelo State. A number have gone into nonprofit organizations. Of course, we are in Northern Virginia. We're very close to NIH. And I've had 3 of my PhD students have gone to NIH, a couple in the National Library of Medicine, and then students have gone into industry, into various companies. So there's really been a huge range of what people have done. At the master's level, a number of students have gone on to other graduate degrees, and Rachel's an obvious example of that. A lot have gone to labs at nonprofit institutions. Again, we've got a lot of MI students at NIH, and some have gone to the Geneva Foundation, and again, some have gone into industry, sometimes in the pharmaceutical industry, because they're very often looking for people who know how to run animals.
Those sound like fantastic jobs.
Well, they don't have any difficulty getting jobs, I can tell you that.
Okay, now let's talk about how to actually apply. Professor Flynn, could you walk us through the application process for the CBN program?
I'm actually going to turn that over to Rachel, because she is the one who has actually gone through the application process. I just see people when their applications arrive. So Rachel, I don't know if you can comment on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think on the next couple slides, there is actually a link that will take you directly to the application, but there is an online graduate admissions application that has all of the basic personal information, where you graduated from, you know, all of the stuff that you will typically see on a college application. You also have to upload all of your transcripts, college transcripts. You have to write a goal statement. And for the goal statement, it really helps to know which labs you are interested in joining, and, you know, why George Mason will be a good fit for you based on your research interest and how that fits in with the lab that you're interested in doing research with. In the past, you had to do GREs, upload your GRE scores. That's optional now. And building a resume and getting 3 letters of recommendation. I would highly recommend getting those 3 letters of recommendation, your recommenders, plenty of
Rachel, I think you're buffering a little bit. It seems like Rachel's having a connection problem. Professor Flynn, would you mind taking over the steps a little bit, or should we wait for Rachel to reconnect? Professor Flynn, I think you're muted.
Sorry, how's that? Okay, so I did want to comment on the letters of recommendation, and that's kind of a problem these days, because a lot of courses are large, a lot of students are taught by graduate students. So, and if you can, that's why working in somebody's lab is useful, because then you can get a strong letter from somebody who actually knows you. I would say it's important to try to get letters from faculty members when you can, from someone who's taught you, and sometimes my graduate students will ask me to write the letter, even though they have taught the student, and obviously have the student draft the letter. I do look at the transcript from the student and ask to see their goal statement, but the letters can be helpful, and you really do want someone who knows you well, and it's better to get someone who's an academic, or in fact, I mean, if you've worked in a lab outside a university, that can be helpful too. But you don't want someone saying that you worked really well as someone making lattes at Starbucks. The GRE scores, we have required them in the past. I think we were undecided whether we were going to go on requiring them faculty was split. Some wanted to, some didn't. But in fact, this year, it's been difficult to get GREs. So for the application in fall 2020, I don't believe we are requiring GRE scores. And so, I mean, it's better to start earlier. One of the issues is if you've got any transcripts from overseas, it can be a pain in the tail to come in, and your application may not proceed as quickly as you might have expected. So try to start it early. And the other thing I would say is that if you want to work in somebody's lab, then please contact the faculty member and tell them that you want to work in that lab. Now, of course, COVID has made it very difficult, but I mean, I think it's useful if you want to work in somebody's lab to email them. If you can visit, that's useful. I mean, right now Mason is closed. We will be opening in August, and the labs are starting to open. But you could at least do a phone interview with somebody. So I do think it's important to contact the person that you would like to work with. Okay.
Thank you so much. Now for some frequently asked questions. If you have any frequently asked questions, there's already a website to answer all of them, and there's also a website for the faculty bios. So as Dr. Flynn said, might be a good idea to look through the faculty bios and to see what kind of labs you're interested in. Some more helpful links. Here's a link for.
Can we go back to that previous slide?
Sure.
So again, I just want to emphasize that you really should look at the web page to see what Mason is doing. I mean, to show that you've got some familiarity with our program. So that's the main advice that I can give, I think, there.
Great, thank you. So again, helpful links. If you want information about the MA program, here's a link for that. Of course, information about the PhD program as well, and the application link. So, Dr. Flynn or Rachel, do you guys have anything else to add? Otherwise, we're going to end the session. Well, thanks for joining, everyone.
Again, just let me emphasize that if you are interested in coming to Mason, then looking at the web page, finding out what we do, maybe looking at papers that faculty members have written, particularly the faculty member that you're interested in working in, is really helpful. And I mean, I think this is less important for people on the human side, but for those of us on the animal side, we do look for people who have courses in biology and chemistry. And I realize that this is difficult for some people because the colleges don't always have the range of courses that people would like. But it is important, I mean, if you want to go into neuroscience on either the human or the animal side, to be taking courses that support that, and not to take courses in basket weaving, for example, because they're not going to support anything. So I personally would take someone with a lower grade in chemistry over someone who's never had chemistry. So I do think it's important to be prepared for your graduate degree. And again, talk to faculty at your own educational institution, and then talk to faculty here, particularly ones that you might be interested in working with. Okay, so that's my final thoughts.
Thank you so much. And now we'll actually end the session. Thank you.